You know, Donald Trump says he wants a wall. He wants $5 billion to pay for a wall, which will probably cost around $80 billion when all is said and done. But he wants his almost $6 billion right now. We could actually save $6 billion in the United States if we simply ended homelessness. It's very simple, very straightforward. It has been done in other countries. It actually saves money. We would literally reduce our expenditures by $6 billion a year by ending homelessness. I've got a whole rant about exactly how this works, how Finland did it, how Cuba has done it, how we can do it, and how we would save money doing it over on patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. You can check it out, patreon.com/THOMHARTMANN, all run together. It's really a pretty extraordinary thing. So please check that out, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, for a really good rant on how we can end homelessness in America. Our book today for the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Age of Eisenhower, America and the World in the 1950s by William I. Hitchcock. This is from chapter 19, page 475, about 3/4 of the way through the book. Republicans of the 1950s knew how to sell a product. They pioneered the use of television advertising in politics, and at their national conventions in 1952 and 1956, they mobilized actors, dancers, acrobats, sports figures, crooners, jugglers, and sword swallowers to infuse their rather dull message of peace and prosperity with some pizzazz. In mid-July 1960, though, as the GOP faithful gathered in Chicago at the International Amphitheater, the same hall in which Ike and Dick had formed their political tandem 8 years earlier, the convention planners were running out of ideas. A giant elephant named Koa, on loan from Louisiana, proved to be too big to amble down the aisles of the hall and had to be returned. The torchlight parade of 500 young Republicans had to be canceled due to the fire hazard of their kerosene-soaked rags. Plans to get Henry Fonda into costume as Abraham Lincoln, a role he had played woodenly in the 1939 film Young Mr. Lincoln, were scotched when Fonda turned out to be a Democrat. Half the hotel rooms in Chicago remained empty a few days before the convention. Besides an absence of hoopla, the top Republican leaders had serious worries. A Gallup poll on the eve of the convention showed that since 1952, the Republicans had lost support among business and professional voters, white-collar workers, and farmers, three key demographic groups. And they had made no inroads among skilled and unskilled laborers who favored the Democratic Party by a ratio of 4-to-1. President Eisenhower's personal popularity had masked serious weaknesses in the Republican Party. As the Republicans gathered in Chicago, John Kennedy, a junior senator with little international name recognition, led Nixon in the polls by 4 points. And I should add, Nixon was the vice president, Eisenhower. The press corps, bored to tears by the lack of drama in Republican ranks, worked hard to breathe life into the candidacies of New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller and Arizona Senator Barry Goldwater, who might, they earnestly hoped, challenge Nixon for the GOP nomination from the left and the right. The Washington Post editorial page noted that both parties inclined toward moderate nominees like Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, and Nixon, but cautioned that, quote, an excess of moderation can yield a pudding devoid of flavor or shape, end quote, and hoped that Goldwater would add a dash of, quote, pepper to the otherwise bland old party's Chicago solemnities, end quote. Indeed, old guard supporters of the dear departed Bob Taft now had a new champion in the ruggedly handsome conservative from the Desert West. It was not to be. Goldwater did not seek the nomination and backed Nixon. Rockefeller, whom most veteran Republicans distrusted for his ideological elasticity and his vanity, pressured Nixon to adopt a number of Kennedy-like platform planks on issues such as defense spending, civil rights, health insurance, and housing. Nixon, terrified that a Rockefeller boomlet might snatch away his long-sought prize, caved into these demands before meeting with Rocky in New York on July 22nd, 3 days before the convention opened. Rockefeller, in turn, threw his support to Nixon in a feeble gesture of party unity. In extracting concessions from Nixon on the GOP platform, though, Rockefeller managed to weaken Nixon's case that he and he alone had the toughness to confront Khrushchev on the world stage. The real challenge Nixon faced in taking the leadership of the Republican Party did not come from Goldwater or Rockefeller. It came from Eisenhower. Of course, Ike supported Nixon's presidential bid since Nixon offered the best hope of extending the Eisenhower legacy. But the distance between those two men, which had always been great, never seemed wider than in 1960. Eisenhower had become the world's most respected, most recognized, and most liked man. For all of his apparent political weaknesses and occasional lapses in his mishandling of the U-2 affair, he occupied an unassailable place in the pantheon of great figures of his time. His war service alone would have placed him on history's pedestal, but he followed that with 8 years of dignified leadership of a country whose global power had reached unprecedented dimensions. When Eisenhower arrived in Chicago on July 26 to address the Republican convention, over 1 million Chicagoans lined the streets along his route to the Sheraton Blackstone Hotel. Shouts of joy rang through the miles of well-wishers. "We like Ike" signs dotted the scene, along with hand-painted expressions of thanks to the old warrior. Confetti, so dense that it stuck to Ike's moist and beaming face, poured from the rooftops. Banners and flags draped every storefront, and lampposts in a blaze of red, white, and blue. Seated before him, or behind him in the open-top presidential Lincoln, Illinois Governor William G. Stratton and Senator Everett Dirksen seemed like supernumeraries. It was Ike the crowd wanted. A loudspeaker in a truck motorcade blared out a popular tune by the Four Knights, "I Love the Sunshine of Your Smile." The president, visibly moved, told reporters outside the hotel, "It's one of the finest crowds I've ever seen." On Tuesday evening, Senator Dirksen, a famously orotund speaker in a profession known for producing magnificent windbags, came to the podium in the amphitheater to introduce the president. Few recalled that 8 years earlier, Dirksen had nominated Senator Taft. Anyhow, the book is The Age of Eisenhower by Hitchcock.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Donald Trump starts his day complaining about the investigations coming his way, and he went to the National Prayer Breakfast and made a startling revelation to all of us. Here he is.
To abolition of civil rights.
Yeah.
To extending the vote for women.
Yeah, you want Sean? Can you restart that from the beginning? Okay, let's hear this from the very beginning. Here he is.
Since the founding of our nation, many of our greatest strides, from gaining our independence to abolition of civil rights, to extending the vote for women, have been led by people of faith and started in prayer.
Yeah, right. Well, also people of color, but, you know, Donald Trump would never mention that. But the abolition of civil rights, that's very interesting. People of faith have led the abolition of civil rights. Well, you know, I suppose you could say it's kind of snarky. You know, obviously he misread his prompter. But there are larger fish to fry in the rants of Donald Trump this morning. He started out with a tweet. This is the guy who spends, you know, according to this recent leak, 60% of his time sitting in his bedroom in his pajamas, eating fast food and drinking Diet Coke and watching Fox News and tweeting. 60% of his time. That's your president. And the remaining 40% of his time is spent down in his office eating fast food, drinking Diet Coke, and talking to people who are on television on Fox News. But he started out today with this tweet that the Republicans never did this to Obama. It never happened before. He's talking about the investigations that were kicked off, really yesterday by Democrats in the House of Representatives. Actually, you know, those of us who were, paying attention remember quite well, for 3 years, year after year after year, the Republicans kept holding hearings in Washington, D.C. in the House of Representatives on what was her name? Lois Lesser? In any case, there was this poor woman who worked at the IRS who they said, "You're not letting conservative groups have their nonprofit status." That's because you hate conservative groups. Well, no, actually, they were holding up the applications of liberal groups too. If they looked like they weren't actually doing nonprofit stuff, but instead were doing political stuff, they were entitled to nonprofit status. And Lois Lerner, I think was her name, as I recall. But anyhow, he's like, they literally for 3 years, they destroyed her career and humiliated it was just 3 years of investigations into the IRS. Planned Parenthood, they had this faked video by a Republican operative, and they spent a year investigating Planned Parenthood. Didn't find anything at the IRS. Then they investigated the Planned Parenthood again in the following year. And then they investigated Benghazi. And then they investigated, a different committee investigated Benghazi. And then another committee investigated Benghazi. And then they got the definitive answer, so they investigated Benghazi 2 more times. Remember the congressman who said, we're going to win the election, the 2016 election, because of Benghazi? That's going to take down Hillary Clinton. And then, Michelle Bachmann going off on all these crazed right-wing conspiracy theories. And then, don't even get me started on the investigations into Hillary Clinton's emails. This is after George W. Bush lost 5 million emails. Karl Rove lost millions of emails. Dick Cheney had millions of emails vanish. But no, we got to find out what happened to Hillary's emails. And they actually found her emails, and they went through them all. There was no there. But I think the important thing that I wanted to talk about this morning is socialism. Steve Mnuchin yesterday tweeted, "We're not going back to socialism. We don't believe in a centralized planned economy where the government puts restraints on billionaire behavior." The billionaire behavior I inserted. But, the reality is that Americans want more socialism. They want America to be more like those countries that have democratic socialism, like the countries of Europe and Central America. Costa Rica, free college, free health care. Costa Rica. Why can't we do that? Oh, we're not smart enough. We're not rich enough. We've got to give tax cuts to the billionaires. We can't have this. The billionaires have to have more tax cuts, don't you know? St. Reagan told us this. No, Americans want more socialism. They want Social Security expanded and strengthened, and they want the cap lifted so it's not just people making under $120,000 a year who are paying for Social Security. They would like the billionaires to pay for Social Security too. Americans would like a national health care system. It has overwhelming support from both Democrats and Republicans, and certainly among independents, that heals people instead of just making people like Stephen J. Hemsley a billionaire over at United Healthcare. They want banks that support local communities rather than ripping people off. Did you notice one of the things that the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau here under Mick Mulvaney wants to do, they announced this yesterday, is they're going to do away with a rule that was put into place during the Obama administration that says that if you're a payday lender, if you're going to charge somebody 400% interest, and these people prey on soldiers and low-income people. Soldiers are low-income people in many cases. And that's who they prey on. And the law says that if you're going to write a loan, one of these high-interest payday loans, before you write that loan, you have to know that this person can pay you back. Because if they can't pay you back, the interest is going to start piling up, and they're going to end up, on a $200 loan, they're going to end up $10,000 in debt because of the interest payments. And Mick Mulvaney and the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau say, yeah, we don't need that rule. We're going to deregulate the payday lenders, right? No, Americans would like a little more socialism. They'd like the banks to be regulated. They'd like to know that they're not going to get ripped off when they walk into a lending institution. Americans would like their food and water to be safe. I mean, how many of us have had food poisoning in the last couple of months? It's become so common in American restaurants, people don't even comment on it anymore. Those bacteria literally did not exist in the 1950s and 60s. I don't remember, throughout my childhood, up until I was well into my teenage years, I literally do not remember one instance of getting food poisoning. The E. coli H157, the one that takes down people's kidneys, that kills people, or leaves people with dialysis for the rest of their lives. We just had an outbreak of it a while ago with the romaine lettuce. That bacteria literally did not exist before 1980. These bacteria are the result of factory farming, of these insane practices and policies that we're pursuing to produce enough, meat to give everybody all they want, and which is killing our population. It's increasing obesity and high blood pressure and all kinds of things. Anyhow, Americans would like their food and their water to be safe, Flint, Michigan. We would like some socialism, please. We would like a mass transportation system that actually works. We'd like to be able to get around our cities at a low cost without having to drive cars. Nobody wants to sit in traffic for hours. We'd like a little socialism. We'd like college educations to be free. A little socialism there, please. When my dad went to college and Louisa's dad went to college on the GI Bill back in the 1940s and early 1950s, the cost that their generation of taxpayers paid to send them to college was returned sevenfold by the additional taxes that they paid as a consequence of the increased income they had as a result of college education. We know that this is an enormous investment. We'd like a little more socialism, please. Invest in our young people. And let's wipe out the debt. It's only $1 trillion. It would cost $1 trillion, or maybe it's $1.5 trillion now, $1.5 trillion to wipe out all the college debt in America. Donald Trump gave billionaires $1.5 trillion last year. On the State of the Union, he said we've spent $6 trillion fighting stupid wars in Iraq that George W. Bush lied us into. We can't take $1.5 trillion and wipe out student debt so that young people can buy a house, they can get married, they can start families, they can start a business. They don't have to be a slave to a dead-end job. They don't have to, desperately, fear the economic future if they're going to be stuck as a barista at Starbucks at $10.50 an hour for the rest of their lives, or whatever they're paying. And we'd like to know that our air transportation system is safe, and we would like our airlines to once again actually compete with each other on price, which means breaking up these giant airline oligopolies, these giant semi-monopolies. But Trump and Mnuchin, the billionaire and his multimillionaire toady, they want none of that. They want what David Koch ran for president on in 1980, which is, just consider this. This is from the 1980 Libertarian platform, the party platform, the Libertarian Party that David Koch ran for vice president on in 1980. This guy is the guy, well, his brother in large part, but these two brothers are the guys who have funded the Republican Party for the last 30 years in a really big way, and the entire conservative movement, from the Heritage Foundation to the Cato Institute to ALEC to Republicans at the state level, at the county level, at the federal level. Most of the Republican Party in some way knows that if they cross the Koch brothers, they're screwed. That's why they're all denying climate change, because the Koch brothers inherited, a fossil fuel fortune. So here's what, when David Koch ran for president: the repeal of the federal campaign finance laws, abolition of Medicare and Medicaid, repeal of Social Security. Yes, in fact, they called it the bankrupt Social Security system when they called for the repeal of it. It's just, it is really, truly pretty breathtaking what these guys were calling for. Repeal of all taxation, repeal of minimum wage laws, end of government ownership, operation, regulation, and subsidy of schools and colleges, abolition of the Environmental Protection Agency, abolition of the Food and Drug Administration, end of all tax-supported services for children. We oppose all government welfare relief projects and aid to the poor programs. Repeal the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Repeal the Consumer Product Safety Commission. Repeal all state usury laws that protect you from banks ripping you off. That's what Trump and Mnuchin. And welcome back. Boy, what a day. This Green New Deal that is dropping. I mean, this literally, to call it a New Deal is not an exaggeration. We're talking about a massive, extraordinary program that, I think is going to, not only revitalize the American democracy and middle class, but will save the planet. Marcia in Englewood, Florida. Hey, Marcia, excuse me. Thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Good to talk to you again.
Thank you.
I really listen to MSNBC, but last night I listened to Lawrence O'Donnell, and he had the absolute best commentary on socialism. He went into how we've almost always been a socialist country, especially since 1901, when the Socialist Workers' Party demanded a 40-hour work week. Even I didn't know that the 40-hour work week was a form of socialism.
Yep.
And I thought I was up on everything.
Well, it's government regulation.
Socialism.
And that's what they're calling socialism, Marcia.
That is socialism, but the Republicans voters don't recognize the 40-hour work week as a part of socialism.
Yep.
And the other thing that he mentioned was that there's good socialism and bad socialism. And he said that 40-hour work week, Social Security, Medicare, is part of socialism. But that's the good socialism. The
Right.
bad socialism is taking a look at the National Football League, which collects taxes, federal taxes, to have money to build these stadiums that different national football leagues demand. And they recently, I don't know how recently, that the Rams wanted a new football stadium, and the government said, no, we can't afford it.
Mm-hmm.
So the billionaire that owns it built his own stadium. What's wrong with that,
Right.
Instead of collecting from taxpayers to pay for the
bad socialism is like when
football stadiums, let them pay for it themselves.
Yeah, bad socialism is like when George W. Bush was able to buy into, I think it was the Texas Rangers, whatever that team is down there in Texas, for a couple $100,000, and then they went to the city, I think it was the city of Dallas or Houston, and said we want you to build a stadium for us. The city put millions, maybe $1 billion into it, and that so increased the value of the team that George W. Bush sold his share for what, $14 million? I mean, it's been a few years, and I'm doing this from memory, but it was a huge return on investment, and that's bad socialism. I'm with you, Marcia. So, excellent point. And I'm sorry I didn't catch Lawrence's rant last night. I've seen 2 tweets about it this morning on my Twitter feed, but apparently he did a pretty good job.
Well, you have a good day.
Okay, thanks a lot, Marcia. I appreciate the call, and thank you for watching us on Free Speech TV. It's coming up on 22 and a half minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. What would you like to see? If we're gonna go full bore socialist, we're gonna strengthen Social Security, we're gonna extend Medicare to everybody, we're gonna go free college education. We want to improve our infrastructure, our transit systems. Where should we start? More government research into drugs that might cure AIDS and things. Where do we start? So while we're talking about socialism, and you're calling in to share what you would like to see in terms of an expansion of socialism, or maybe a diminution of socialism. Marcia just a minute ago was telling me that she thought that, or apparently Lawrence O'Donnell said last night, or O'Connell, or whatever his name is, O'Donnell, said on his show that, bad socialism is giving money to football teams, to NFL football teams, to build stadiums. Well, I don't disagree with that. And that is socialism. So, maybe there is bad socialism too. But in addition to this, now we have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez saying, let's reboot the economy and save the world at the same time. This will strengthen the American working class. It'll strengthen the American middle class. It will reduce our carbon emissions. It will put people back to work. in jobs that actually pay something more than a Starbucks, barista. Let's do this. 2018 was one of the hottest years on record. The last 5 years have been the 5 hottest years in the history of planet Earth. And it's not cooling down given all the hundreds of billions of tons of carbon dioxide that we have poured into the atmosphere as a result of burning fossil fuels since the 1900s. In just, roughly 150 years, we have wrecked our planet's atmosphere with our industrial activity. And so Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I mean, this is this flashing red light. Wildfires scorched 1.5 million acres just in California. Extended droughts across Europe, glaciers at the North and South Poles, and on, now this big glacier in the Alps, or not the Alps, in the Himalayas is melting, which is going to cause famine in India and in China, a decade or two down the road when it finally dries up and there's no more rivers there. We have stronger hurricanes, the polar vortex, recurring high tide flooding, life-threatening heat waves. This is from Brenda Eckersel, who's been a guest on this program, climate scientist. Longer wildfire seasons, more rain during heavy downpours. Climate change in 2018, last year, cost the United States $91 billion. Trump wants $5 billion to build a wall. It cost us climate change cost us $91 billion and killed 247 people that we can quantify, that we can point to and say, yep, this is the case. And so, coming on the back end of this, we have now Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez saying, cool, let's have a Green New Deal. Let's achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions. Net zero. Let's have a universal health care program, a jobs guarantee, and free higher education. These are literally parts of her new Green Deal. She has 60 members of the House and 9 senators co-sponsoring this resolution. It's only 6 pages long. This is not the law. This is the outline. This is the framework. One of its goals, I'm quoting from the document, from the legislation that AOC is dropping, I believe today. Quote, to promote justice and equity by stopping current, preventing future, and repairing historic oppression of indigenous peoples, communities of color, migrant communities, deindustrialized communities, depopulated rural communities, the poor, low-income workers, women, the elderly, the unhoused, people with disabilities, and youth. And how are we going to do this? We're going to convert America's energy systems to solar, wind, and whatever other sources of energy may be appropriate. On the coasts, presumably, tidal weather. In some parts of the country, geothermal. In other parts, particularly around big cities, maybe even biomass with all the waste that we produce. But we could do this. We absolutely could do this. Norway's halfway there. We can do this. So what socialist programs would you like to see? And which ones do you think we should do away with?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Let's just completely embrace this term. If the Republicans and Frank Luntz have decided that they're going to throw the word socialist at Democrats in the upcoming election, let's get ready. Our book today is Midnight in Chernobyl, the untold story of the world's greatest nuclear disaster by Adam Higginbotham. This is from chapter 19, Saturday, April 26, 1986, 4:16 p.m. Republicans in the 1950s knew how to sell a product. Ukraine. They pioneered the use of television. Senior Lieutenant Alexander Lodachov loved radiation the way other men love their wives. Tall and good-looking, 26 years old, with close-cropped